Well, shalom, shalom, everybody. It's great to have you all here, and we're looking forward to a great session today on Parshat Hayyei Sara. Hayyei Sara. This parsha contains a number of important stories. First, the story of the passing of Sarah. The rabbis make the connection that the passing of Sarah is due to the proximity with the story and the sacrifice of Isaac, that in one way or another she finds out about the sacrifice of Isaac, and it's just too much for her, and she ups and dies. I've said in the past that if that is the case, then Isaac is 37 years old at the Akedah, because the Torah tells us that Sarah is 127 years of age when she dies. She gave birth to Isaac when she was 90. So if her death is proximate to the Akedah, that means that Isaac was 37 years old when Abraham went to sacrifice him, which is not necessarily the sense of the text. In the text itself, we get the idea that Isaac is a na'ar, a little boy. I always picture Yitzchak in the Akedah somewhere in the age of 5, 6, 7. He's a curious and precocious little boy. If he's 37, what does that mean? The only compelling answer I can give is that the reason why they make Sarah's death proximate to the Akedah is twofold. One, because that's the text. The text is indicating that, so it's solving a textual problem. And the second is because if he was 6 or 7, she would have had to live 30 years knowing that her husband was about to do this. Aside from the strain in their relationship to begin with, she was living in Kiryat Arba, he was living in Beersheba. They were, for all intents and purposes, separated at the time. This would have been a terrible, terrible trauma to live with. How do you live with the person that was going to murder your son? Marlene, you have raised your hands. Unmute yourself.
Yes. Why is her name mentioned twice in the same sentence? It says her life was so many years, and that was how old she was, and it mentions her name. This is my guess is basically, the literary guess. It's all about emphasis. It's worth looking at. Not the question I was going to go for today, though. That was just the preamble. So if she's going to live that long, maybe being 37 is still an immature age.
Nah. Nah. Okay. All right, we go on. Abraham acquires burial property for Sarah, buries her in a very, thorough negotiation, pays over the list price for the property to establish firm title to the land. And then we get into the major part of the story, which is what I want to look at, which is the acquisition of the bride for Isaac. Okay, and this I love this story. It's a romantic story. It's an important story in terms of the development of characters. It's also important because we have, I think, one of the most important minor characters, Eliezer, who himself is a great storyteller. I've talked about him in the past. Sorry, just a second, getting telemarketing. And we have the way that the story unfolds and the way that Eliezer tells the story is remarkable, worth a lot of conversation. The fact that this is the longest chapter in the entire Torah, I think, is significant. And it points out, one commentator points out that the longest chapter in the Torah deals with marriage, which tells you something about the Torah's idea about marriage. So let me pull up the text for a second, and we will Oh no. Well, we'll do this here. Here we go. And this is the text. Can you all see? I hope you can see. Va'avraham zaken ba bayamim Adonai barach et Avraham bakol. Abraham was now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And he said to the senior servant of his household who had charge of all that he owned, put your hand under my thigh, which is a way of saying, we're going to make a deal. It actually means a lot of other things, but we're not going to go there. I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. Ki el artzi ve'el moladati telech ve'lakachta isha livni le'yitzchak. But go to the land of my birth. It's not precise. Or go to my land and the land of my birth. Ve'lakachta isha livni le'yitzchak. So you will recognize, this will kind of ting and echo in your ear, that when Abram starts on the journey, God says to him, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetcha me'beit avicha. So here he's telling him to go to his arts, to his eretz, and to his moledet. He omits beit avicha here. I'm not exactly sure why, but later on in the story, Eliezer will report that my master wanted me to go back to his family and to his father's household. So there is something going on here. But what I want to focus on is the question, why is it that Abraham does not want Eliezer to get a wife for Isaac from Mibnota Kanani Asher Anochi Oshe Bikirbo, from the daughters of the Canaanites who he is dwelling amongst? Okay, this to me seems a rather important point, that Abraham desires a wife for Isaac that is not from the land of Canaan. Now, Abraham, in terms of the possibilities of wives that he could select for Isaac, could include a number of different possibilities. For example, he has a kinsman who lives in the land of Canaan. His name is Lot. Okay, we experienced Lot last week in Vayera. Lot lived in Sodom, and because Sodom was destroyed, Lot escaped to the hills, to a cave in the hills, where, together with his daughters, unnamed daughters, he plied with alcohol father's two sons from the two daughters. They go on to be Ben Ami and Moav, two progenitors of the peoples Ammon and Moav. So Abraham could have said, well, go to my brother, my nephew, who is also sometimes known as his brother, Lot, and get a wife for me from Lot. So there's one problem with that. And the problem with that is Lot had boys, not girls. So there are no women. There's no women next of kin in the family of Lot. That's problem number one. Probably more important is that whoever issued from Lot or who was associated with Lot simply was not acceptable. Why? Because, well, Lot became a Canaanite, basically. Lot assimilated into Canaanite society by abandoning the life of the shepherd and by abandoning the Abrahamic project, which is to live in the land and be part of the covenant, which he never was, but he never really showed affinity towards Abraham. From the very beginning, he wanted to separate from Abraham. That is to say, the beginning, subsequent to their arrival on return from Egypt, Lot and Abraham have this kind of, polite skirmish, conflict where the land is not big enough for both of them. Abraham says, look, if you want to go here, I'll go here. If you want to go here, I'll go here. And they separate. And so it's from that moment that Lot goes on his own trajectory. And because he starts out as a shepherd, but he ends up in a city. This is not insignificant. This is very significant. The Bible favors shepherds. The Bible, that is to say, the Hebrew Israelite tradition, favors the model of the shepherd, because the shepherd does not adhere to anybody. The shepherd is really the symbol of liberty. The person who lives in the city is interested in wealth and power. These are the symbolic, paradigms here. It's a long, long discussion. Lot is enticed by the city where there's power. I mean, to a certain extent, it still exists today because, we who live in the suburbs, are just country bumpkins, right? We have some life here, but if we really want culture, we have to go to the city. And when we really want to see power, wealth, and influence, we go to the city. I can recall, as a young student, the first time really in a mature way, I went to New York City. It was an overwhelming experience coming from even a capital city where to see buildings over a certain number of stories, to see the expanse and the scale of things and the wealth, it's just beyond it. And to this day, I mean, you don't have to, there are people from other cities who go to Fifth Avenue or go walk on, on the east side of Manhattan, and you are overwhelmed by the presence of wealth and power, prestige, and other things. So that's what you find in the city. The city represents that, and the city also represents, in a certain way, the lust for power in the form of the sovereign of the city who makes everybody subject. And this is the subcurrent idea in the Bible, that shepherds are not bound by that, both politically and economically, and also theologically. So Lavan, he has gravitated to that, he has taken on that, and he lives in it. And if you saw my comment on the Parsha sheet last week, it was he wants the city, but he ends up in a cave fathering his own bastard children from the incestuous relationship between he and his daughters. Okay, so if you were Abraham doing a checklist of suitable brides for your son, you'd say, no, don't think so. Okay. Next problem. Well, there's another people that has already married into the family of Abraham. We have learned in a previous passage that when Hagar leaves Abraham, or is kicked out of Abraham and Sarah's residence, Hagar ends up, after she is abandoned, she will go to the area south of Beersheba, and she will marry off her son to an Egyptian. Why? Hagar is an Egyptian. So Hagar wants to marry off her son to a kinswoman of hers. She is an Egyptian. Abraham could have selected from proximate geographical pools of suitable mates an Egyptian woman for Isaac, but he does not. Why? Well, we have to ask that question. So he says, go, do not marry off my son to a Canaanite woman, marry her off instead to a person from my land and my birthplace, Artsi umoladati. It's not yet my family, but it's my land and my birthplace, meaning I want you to marry off someone who shares my ethnic background. I want you to marry him off to someone who shares my linguistic background. It is true that the people who lived in that area still had some form of paganism, but it was a much better deal for Abraham to marry him off to someone in that territory because there was some familiarity. Marlene, you had a question.
We already think that he doesn't trust the locals because he was so intent on paying cash and having it be an open deal.
Okay, so that's another part of that. Sorry, that he doesn't trust the locals, and this I think is really one of the things. And I'm going to come back to this as we move to the end of this. So it won't surprise us that that many people have weighed in on this question of why Abraham insists that Isaac marry someone from his kith and kin, a kindred woman. I'm going to now bring up some sources. We will share these sources here, and let's go with that. Why did Abraham not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite? Okay, well, we got some reasons. First of all, the Canaanites are cursed. Okay, this comes back to us from the story of Shechem, the story of Noah. What happened in the story of Noah? I could bring up that text, but let's just, I'm sorry, just a second. Here we go. What happened in the story of Noah? So Noah, can you all see this? Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant the vineyard. He drank of the wine, became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness, told his brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it both their backs, walking backward. They covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned that his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, who the lowest of slaves shall be to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem." So Vayomer Arur Canaan, Evet Avadim Yeh Le'echav. Okay, so what that means is that Abraham is saying, I don't want him to marry a Canaanite. The Canaanites are cursed. Why are they cursed? They're cursed because Ham, Canaan's father, was lewd or acted with lewdness with regard to his father's drunken stupor. He mocked his father. He was disrespectful to his father, and that rendered him cursed. And Canaan would be Evet Avadim. We don't have to be biblical scholars here to detect that the Torah has it in for Canaan. The Torah really doesn't like Canaan, and for good reason. In the story, Canaan is lewd, or his father is quite lewd. The Canaanites, not only do they represent the city structure in that world, but they also represent a kind of cruel form of paganism. They engage in human sacrifice. They have lewd sexual practices. They're just not a savory bunch. And the Torah makes no secret of its hatred, its disdain for the Canaanites. And certainly that comes up in the book of Leviticus. You don't want, there are laws against doing what the Canaanites do. And there are, and certainly once you get into the book of Joshua, when Israel comes back to the land of Canaan, the displacement of the Canaanites is really the first directive of the Israelites, notwithstanding the fact that even during the course of the conquest of the land, there is a Canaanite presence that remains there, really coterminous with the Israelites. The Israelites, through David, are able to establish a federation of their tribes, and there is still a Canaanite presence there, and that is borne by archaeology. So here we have a comment as to why Abraham doesn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite, and it says, "Hisiru b'shvua shelo yikach isha livno mibnot Canaan hazera mekulal." He will take a wife from my son amongst the daughters of the Canaanites. He warned Eliezer not to take a wife from a nation which was cursed. When a woman is predestined for destruction, she is apt to drag her husband in the same general direction. The fisha isha muchana lefuranu titar et adam letzida. she's going to bring him down. Okay, so the Canaanites are just poison. They're awful influence, awful people. They're poison. Radak, another commentator, the same idea. For the entire Canaanite tribe is cursed. But Abraham, Baruch. You can't mix the blessed seed with the cursed seed. And so there seems to be a cluster of ideas in the commentary on this question, that it's because they are cursed that we're not going to have anything to do with them. Okay, but I would just hold out the question that I'm sure you're anticipating, which is, well, wait a minute. Somewhere along the line, the Israelites do marry Canaanites, and I'll hold that for a second. So we're saying here that it's because Canaanites are cursed, no dice, no marrying Canaanites. Second claim, second idea, because so as not to raise questions about the claim to the land. This makes a lot of sense, right? And this has to do with things that many of us can be sensitive to with regard to inheritance. When you have a son who marries a woman from obviously from another family, how does inheritance transmit itself? Okay, so I'll give you an example that you might or may not like. Okay, so Donald Trump is supposedly a wealthy man, and there's Ivanka and there's Jared. Okay, well, who gets the inheritance? Well, Jared married into the Trumps, so is Jared entitled to the Trump inheritance, or is Ivanka entitled to the Kushner inheritance? Okay, now this is not trivial because every single family has to deal with this. Of course, we have legal mechanisms and instrumentality to deal with this today, because it's all written down in wills and testaments. Okay, in fact, the estate or the person who dies can direct her estate to provide inheritance anywhere you want. You can go to charity. Okay, but in antiquity, when you didn't have foundations and other kinds of mechanisms like this, there were rules for how things got inherited. We see this later on in the Bible, specifically with regard to the daughters of Tzalafchad. If inheritance goes to male heirs, but what if you don't have any male heirs? Tzalafchad died and he only had daughters. And so there, the question was presented to Moses, what do we do with our father's estate? And Moses answered in what is probably revolutionary at the time. In the event that there are no sons for the estate can go to the daughters. In other words, when there's intermingling, it raises a question about the title. So here is Chizkuni, another commentator, medieval commentator, Mimnot HaKanani, Pen yomru alai al yadei rusha umatana nichnas hu le'eretz. From among the daughters do not take. Abraham did not want that in the future anyone could claim that his claim on the Holy Land was based on intermarriage with the previous owners of that land. It had to be established beyond any shadow of a doubt that the Israelites' claim to the land was based on God having promised it to their founding father, and that he used his power to do this on their behalf. I think this is a very compelling idea. In other words, the first one was, they're cursed, they're terrible, fat. Canaanites, fat. Second idea is, wait a minute, there is something really profound here, and that is God promises the land to Abraham and his descendants. If Abraham marries off Isaac to a Canaanite, the claim could be that Isaac did not get the land because of God. Isaac got the land because he married a Canaanite and he inherited it. I think that that's a very profound idea, and it appears in another couple of commentaries. Bechor Shor, grandson of Rashi, says Achsanim, and I've translated Susie Achsanim. I've said it's immigrants here. but I also, Achsani is a guest. Okay, so it's a transient or agree. I'm going to say Achsanaim are green card holders. Okay, when you're a resident alien, Achsanim mitchadnim bivnei haaretz. They marry the local population in order to inherit property on the basis of their marriages, as Esav did to Avalima. And it says, Avalanit eni tzarich shari sharei natan le'akadosh et haaretz. In other words, Abraham is saying, it's the same idea. I don't want anybody to make that claim that we got the land through inheritance or through opportunistic marriage, okay? I want to make the claim that we got the land because God said. I think that's a very powerful idea. I just thought that on the subject of marriage of immigrants, you do not have to look far in our culture or in our history to find examples of this where people married other people from different places or immigrants. I mean, you don't want to Google mail order brides, but that phenomenon still exists. That you could go on the internet, choose if you're a man, choose a woman, and have her imported, usually from Russia or Ukraine, and or China or Asia, other countries, and they come and obviously there's a big business in that. But and some of you will have more direct experience with this phenomenon than others. During World War II, thousands and thousands of men came back with women from other countries, and this is true in other wars. Although I didn't do enough research on how many veterans of Vietnam came back with Vietnamese women. Obviously, there are thousands and thousands of children born to Vietnamese women and American GIs. They're Amerasians. You can look that up. But here, just take 2 seconds to look at this beautiful little video here.
Medals, maps, uniforms. That's what most men brought back from World War II. But thousands of Canadian soldiers brought home something that would change their lives forever. Wives.
My mother said, no, for heaven's sakes, don't go and do something stupid and get married.
During the war, at least 45,000 young women, most of them British, married Canadian soldiers. The reason was simple. At a time in their lives when love would naturally bloom, English men were in short supply, but there were plenty of Canadians. From 1939 to 1945, 500,000 Canadian soldiers trained in Britain. The King and Queen inspected Canadian troops and found them up to snuff. So did Doiran Blackburn.
I said to my friend, I love that fellow's smile.
Doiran couldn't have fallen for a soldier with worse odds of survival. Bruce Blackburn was a paratrooper, dropped behind enemy lines for the D-Day invasion.
Once D-Day started, I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. I didn't know if he was alive or not. You just didn't know. And he had been taken prisoner, and he did get away.
When Bruce came back wounded but alive, the couple decided to get married right away. Friends donated ration cards for the gown. And the trousseau?
My husband said, well, I have a parachute. So my mother made me a wedding or a nightgown out of a parachute silk, apart from other items.
Doiran and Bruce were lucky. Parents, commanding officers, even old girlfriends in Canada often opposed these English-Canadian love affairs.
Okay, so that I mean, it goes on for another few minutes. It's a beautiful, beautiful set of stories. And you get the idea, you get the point that, marriages happen under all sorts of extraordinary circumstances, including the circumstance where and it goes on later, and we didn't have to watch all the rest of the 5 minutes, where these men brought these women back, okay, to Canada. And, one of them lives in a farm in Saskatchewan. One of them lives in, it's just, and they go like, what? And that story is repeated, hundreds of thousands of times in America. The same thing happened, obviously, where Americans came back with European women, either from England or from France or from Germany or elsewhere, and brought them to who knows where, to Montana, to Yechupetz, and they were, hundreds, thousands of miles away from anything. But they fell in love. They got married. Some of them marriages did not survive, but that was a phenomenon. So marrying people from another place. Now, the reason why they got married was because, at least in the example that I showed you, the Canada English model, it's almost an Abraham story. These people are essentially from the same ethnic linguistic background. They do share the same kinds of ideas. Okay.
Rabbi?
Oh, the video we didn't show on the screen. I'm sorry. All right. That's why good thing to stop.
Rabbi?
All right. Yes, go ahead. Who's asking? Susie?
Yeah. Aksanaim, yeah, you could call the Aksanaim wayfarers.
Okay, wayfarers, indeed. All right, so let's go back to the text here. And we got, oops.
Rabbi?
Yes, question. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm going to cancel.
I think the problem is for the next generation, or Jacob's generation, his children married out. Yehuda had a
Oops. Say that again.
the others married. So at
I'm
some
sorry,
point they started
you
to
froze
pick up
here.
local wives.
We froze. We got to.
You're freezing.
I'm freezing.
You're freezing.
Am I back now?
All right. Yes. Okay. So
Say your question again. I'm sorry.
when you get to Jacob, his children married out.
That's
Joseph
correct.
married an Egyptian. Judah married a Canaanite. And in fact, King David comes from that relationship.
That is
And
correct.
we don't know who the others married.
I'm sorry. Let me get to that in a second. Okay, my text evaporated here. Okay, 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so
He's got another.
all right, so Steve, you're quite right. By the time that Jacob's children marry, they're marrying Canaanites. Okay, so I showed the illustration of people marrying from other sides. I just have one more item to share on that subject, and that is this one here. There's an article. It's not going to come up, I don't think. Let's see if this comes up. No. All right. This talks about mail order brides of Jamestown. Can you see this text here? It's not coming up. You're seeing this article? No. Let me just stop share for a second, and this is how you do it. Hang on.
Oh, it worked.
How about this?
Yeah, it was there a second ago.
Here we go. So in the
There
early
it
days, here we go. In the early days of English settlement, America had lots of men, tobacco, and land. All it needed was women. First comes love, then comes marriage. All right. The men of Jamestown desperately wanted wives, but women were refusing to immigrate. They had heard disturbing reports of dissension, famine, and disease, etc. An immediate influx was needed to save the foundering colony. The primary proponent of marital immigration was the Virginia Company. Okay, and so it was that they brought in, shiploads of women, first by, enticing women to come to America, and then by kidnapping them. And that was a way of providing brides. There are lots of stories like this of how women are procured for marriage.
Hold on 1 second.
How women are procured for marriage, and we have that experience in the United States as well. All right, let's go on. There are more reasons for. I'm sorry. Just a second. We'll do this again. Stop share. There are more reasons for the marriage. And this is because they shared values. This is Haktava Kabbalah. This is another, he's from 200 years ago. Mecklenburg is his name. Because the Canaanites were evil in their values and their deeds and their distorted faith, all of which have physical and psychological effects, which would then be transferred for the generations that emerge from, like hatred and vengeance and cruelty and anger, okay? Ki הכנענים היו רעים במבדות ומעשים באמונה משובשת, right? Corrupt. ואלה יעשו רושם בגוף ובנפש. They have lasting impact on your life. ויעברו שומם אל הבנים, and this would get transferred to generations and generations. In other words, there was an important symbolic role in marrying off Abraham's children, the son, to someone who shared his values. And this, I think, is a very powerful idea. The idea that they would share values. This is an idea that we see in popular culture. I'm going to put up this book here. This is called Lessons for Living, Tried and True Advice from the Wisest American. I really love this book. And in this book, he says that he interviews a lot of different older people, the greatest generation. He says, first lesson of marriage, marry someone a lot like you. I asked hundreds of older Americans what is most important for a long and happy marriage, and their advice was just about unanimous. Opposites may attract, but they may not be the best for lasting marriages. You will recall my warning that some of the experts' lessons are controversial and won't sit well with everyone, but it's important to convey to you exactly what they told me, especially when nearly everyone endorsed the same principle. Based on their long experiences, both in and out of love relationships, their first lesson is this: you are much more likely to have a satisfying marriage for a lifetime when you and your mate are fundamentally similar. Most important, the experts believe that marriage is vastly more difficult with someone whose orientation and approach to life is different from yours. There are many ways partners can be similar, but the experts focus on one dimension in particular: similarity in core values. Okay? Now, I've talked to many people entering into relationships over the years, and I've heard all kinds of reasons for falling in love. For people in their 20s, reasons can include things like love interest, having a lively sense of humor, making good money, da 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 da. Okay, so this is something that I think we understand intuitively, that values are what makes the relationship. By the way, it's not ethnicity, it's not race, it's certainly not race, but marriage to someone similar to you in values is what makes a marriage work. And so there is the idea, especially in the last interpretation, that what Abraham is looking for is a woman who will share the same stock of values. That what we are seeing is the Canaanites really are oriented towards other things, and that people from Abraham's family in his birthplace, they are going to be oriented to Abraham's values. Okay, and I go on. So let's just share this page here. There are numerous reasons. There are numerous reasons why Abraham does not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite, and it is fascinating that Rashi doesn't deal with this question. Rashbam emphasizes that because he wants him to marry Dafka from the family. Ramban, because the Canaanites were cursed. Ovadia Sforno believed that there was no Canaanite woman worthy of him. Or Chaim thought that was so that he could not marry Eliezer's daughter, and on and on and on it goes. And we have more comments here. Abraham does not regard Canaanite women as suitable marriage partners. He orders Eliezer to do that. Perhaps their customs are alien to him. According to the dominant view of the time, one that is still encountered in various societies today, marriage is a matter for the entire family. Abraham has no relatives in Canaan, and so he wanted to establish kinship. And lastly, from Yoram Azoni, this is, he says, he fears that if his son marries a local woman, he will assimilate to the ways of the Canaanites. He is therefore counting on a kinsman to provide a suitable bride who will prevent Abram's family from gradually going over to idolatry and the surrounding peoples. So all of that is substantial, okay? But it only makes the problem that Steve alluded to a little more powerful. And that problem is, hey, wait a minute. If you don't want any Hebrew Israelites marrying off to Canaanites, what are you going to do? You're going to have everybody go and find, people from the family? Look, it worked. It was a necessity for Abraham to send Eliezer to Aram to find a bride for Isaac. Jacob made the journey to Aram to find his own bride and was told specifically to marry his cousins. When it comes to the next generation, what happens? So Steve, you already alluded to the fact that the next generation, Judah marries a Canaanite. He marries Bat Shua HaKnaani. She is the daughter of Shua, the Canaanite. And not only that, but Judah marries off his sons, Onan and Shelah. Well, not really Shelah. Is married to a Canaanite woman. We don't know her provenance, but her name is Tamar. We don't know where she comes from, but I'm assuming she came from the local population, right? Because at that point already, they weren't going to go back to Haran to get wives from their second cousins. They were in the land. So the question that I have is, wait a minute. The Canaanites have a problem that they're idolaters and they're pagans and they have bad values and they are licentious and they are fat. They are disgusting people, rotten people, okay? But wait a minute. Judah marries a Canaanite. Not only that, but Joseph will marry who? It's not an accident, in my opinion, that Joseph marries an Egyptian and Judah marries a Canaanite. And I believe that the rest of the brothers will marry an assortment of people from different kinds of backgrounds, mostly Canaanite. And so therefore, what I want to suggest is that there is a different reason for Abraham insisting that Isaac marry from the family. And I'm going to put up my theory, which I invite you to tear down immediately, okay? Here's my theory. This is, didn't make it to I wrote it on the sheet. Well, I had a theory and it didn't make it into the sheet. I'll say it out loud. My theory is that Abraham marries a kinswoman. She is, according to the rabbis, the daughter of his late brother. In the passage that is referred to with the birth, with the right before Lech Lecha, Avi Milka, Avi Iska, that Haran is the father of Lot, but also, the father of Milka and the father of Yiska. The rabbis identify Yiska as Sara, therefore, they are saying that Abraham married his niece. Okay, that's number one. So my theory is as follows. Abraham marries his niece. Abraham was supposed to be the father of the nation, but Abraham did not succeed in fathering the nation because Abraham only had one son. Well, one son for whom the covenant was going to go through. He doesn't have, at this point, he doesn't have 12 sons. 12 is the magic number for a nation. He has one, so he fails. So he has to get it started off with Isaac. And he has to have in the life of Isaac a replication of his life. And so he says, since I couldn't start the nation off from a family that was totally differentiated ethnically, spiritually, economically, psychologically, culturally, linguistically, and every other modality from Canaan, I'm going to send him back I'm going to send my servant back to get a wife for him from there, and we will start over. And so he does. And through the beautiful story that we have in this parsha, Eliezer succeeds in acquiring this woman, Rebecca. And if you read carefully, what is so amazing, and I'm going to write about this for our sheet this week, is that when they ask Rebecca if she wants to go, she says, Elech, right? I will go. And Rebecca is almost a replication, or virtually a replication of Abraham. Abraham is told, Lech lecha, and he goes. When they ask Rebecca if she will go, all she says is Elech. And so that echoes the Lech lecha of Abraham. So Rebecca becomes very much a replication of Abraham's journey. Journeying herself, she marries Isaac. But Isaac and Rebecca fail to form a nation as well. And so what happens? Well, through the transference of the birthright and blessing to Jacob, they say to Jacob, Rebecca says, I hate these Canaanite women. I can't stand them. Go back to my father's house, to my brother, and marry them. And basically, Isaac says something similar, basically saying, you will go back and marry the daughters of Laban. Essentially, to replicate the pattern again, because Isaac and Rebecca failed. So Jacob goes back, he marries Rachel and Leah. He ends up having the children through them with their handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah. He manages to assemble a family of 12 boys and one girl. 12 is the magic number with which you start a nation. He comes back from that place, having separated himself from Laban in a skirmish, basically, or a light argument. He's running away from Laban. Laban catches up to him. They have a big fight, and they end up making a pact that says that it's a boundary pact, Gal Ed, establishing the boundaries between that area and the area that Jacob will inherit. Once that is established, Jacob doesn't need to marry off any of his children to that place again. And so they live in Canaan, and they marry off their people to the Canaanites. And there is the one text which I have to bring up for you, and you'll give me 2 seconds to do that. It's a text when they, it has to do with Joseph, the Joseph story in a few weeks. What happens is that when they bring back the tunic to Yaakov, what happens to Yaakov? Yaakov gets so upset, he is not able to be comforted. Okay, and here is the text. All right, I'm going to bring it up on the share screen here. So the text is Vayakumu kol banav v'chol banatav lenachamo. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Story is They brought back the tunic, the torn tunic. He says, my son is dead. Vayikras Yaakov simlotav v'yasem sak b'marav v'yirabel. Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and he observed mourning for many days. All his sons and daughters sought to comfort him. Wait a minute. Where does Jacob get daughters? Jacob didn't have any daughter. He only had one daughter, okay? But daughters is plural. Where are the daughters? So Rashi on this comment says as follows. And I'm try and bring up Rashi here. Can you all see the Rashi or no? No, sorry. Rashi says as follows. Rabbi Judah said the twin sister was born with each of the Jacob's sons, and they took a stepsister to wife. Rabbi Nehemiah said their wives were Canaanite women and not their stepsisters. What is meant by all his daughters-in-law. For a person does not hesitate to call his son-in-law his son and his daughter-in-law his daughter. Okay? So who did the children of Jacob marry? They married Canaanites. Did they worship idols? Weren't they disgusting? Were their claim? The claim to the land is established. They were a people already. They were able to, through the force of numbers, maintain their monotheism, shall we say, and their culture and their identity. The women that they married into the family were assimilated into the family and not the other way around. And that is what's going on here. So when when Abraham says to Eliezer, don't marry off my son to a Canaanite, he is saying, we are not yet secure enough to assimilate others to us. What will happen is, if I marry him off to one of them, he will assimilate to them. Now Jacob is saying that I have 12 sons, and we have big barbecues and big events and big family gatherings, right? When women marry in, they will assimilate into our family and they will propagate our ideas. They will propagate our values. And that happens and it doesn't happen. In the case of Tamar, you will recall Tamar outsmarts Judah. So Tamar is substantial on her own, okay? But in the case of Ruth, who is a Moabite, she assimilates into the people of Israel, but she on her own is a magnificent person, a person with tremendous values. So what we're saying here is that it all depends. It's not a black and white case. The Canaanite women, some of them were idolaters and pagans, but they were absorbed into the Israelite family and became monotheists. Some were just wonderful. They were just beautiful women who assimilated because their values were assimilatable values. But what happened is the people became the people with whoever the wives were, whether they were Canaanites, Egyptian, Moabites, Ammonites, or any other ethnic group. They came, they were absorbed, and they were assimilated into the Israelite culture. When the culture is insecure in the first generation, Abraham, in the second generation, Isaac, women from the dominant culture are not wanted. They don't want to be assimilated. When the culture is secure, it's fine. Hey, I think that happens in America. I think that is part of the way of explaining intermarriage in America. When Jews were not secure in their Americanness, they tended not to intermarry, or they intermarried less. As Jews became more and more secure in America, and I think it goes both ways. They assimilated into America because of a sense of identity security, or they assimilated there because they didn't have a sense of security. And now what you have is there are plenty of people who marry into the Jewish people because they want to become Jewish. They like the Jewish. It's a unique moment in the history of intermarriage where, because Jews are not despised as they once were, that people seek Jewish mates because they are acceptable to them. So the idea of what constitutes your own security and insecurity based on either ethnic, cultural, or religious criteria, I think is something that is fascinating, and that kind of undulates in this story. I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to criticize or argue or somewhat question or agree. Comment. Anybody have a comment here on this question? Go ahead, Marlene.
What about the adage, a son is a son till he takes a wife, a daughter's a daughter for all of her life?
So that's a very good point, and those I think it's true with almost everyone here. Maybe not everyone. Those of us who have people who have married into our families, look, I've officiated enough weddings to hear the following: we didn't get a son-in-law, we didn't get a daughter-in-law, we got a son, we got a daughter, right? And certainly, at the end of a life, when a patriarch or matriarch passes away, and often at the eulogy, a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law will get up and say, I didn't lose my father-in-law, I lost really someone who was like my father. I lost someone who was like my mother. So that came up in one of the comments here, which was that we often refer to our in-law children not as our in-law children, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, but as our son and daughter. One should be careful to make that claim. I don't want to insult the actual parents of the son-in-law or daughter-in-law, but when you experience life together, as we all do, it is certainly true that people become part of your family, and they are like a son and they are like a daughter. It's very, very true. Okay. Any other questions, comments, brothers? So yes, go ahead, Ellie.
I see a big change from Abraham and what he did, and then the later generations. And it seems to me that each one was responding to the culture of his time. Abraham was living in a smaller part, in a smaller universe, and didn't have as much experience as those who came later on. So what was written in stone, he said to his Eliezer, you have to bring my son a wife from my family. 2 generations later, didn't work that way any longer. So things change, and within Judaism, things change as time goes on. And I found that was interesting.
It is interesting, but as usual, I'm going to disagree with you because I don't think it's a matter of that. I don't think it's that theme.
Your voice is frozen, Rabbi.
I'm sorry, I froze. Can you hear me now again? I'm still frozen. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's that going on. It's that I think what's more important here is establishing the family and not necessarily the continuity and change. The reality is going to affect the family. I mean, you're absolutely right. What happens in the 4th generation is that they have to change, because it's just not practical anymore to go back to the old country and get women for the son. It's not, unless they're going to take a boatload of women like the war brides, and ship them off and marry them off, or Jamestown, I'm sorry. That's just not feasible. But what Abraham was really, secure on, and really adamant on, and so was Isaac, that in order to start, they had to be from the same stock. They had to be differentiated from the Canaanites. They had to be linguistically, culturally, ethnically different, and they had to maintain those boundaries. By the next generation, it couldn't be sustained. It couldn't be sustained at all. Okay. All right. Either we're frozen. We are frozen. Come back, everybody.
Can hear you.
Now we can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, I'm sorry.
Now we can't.
Now we can. All right, so we're going to end it there, I think. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good day.
And have a really good day. And
Thank you.
look forward Tonight is
Thank you very
Kristallnacht, and we have a very important program tonight. Please join us for that program. Okay.